Smadar is a licensed clinical psychologist both in California and Israel, a member of the senior staff at the Student Psychological Service Center at Ben-Gurion University in Beersheba, Israel, and also is a supervisor. She developed what she calls cognitive non-dual approach in psychology, an eclectic approach to both group and individual psychotherapy. It includes, I believe, brief depth-oriented therapy, CBT, mindfulness, and existential humanistic psychotherapy. She's in private practice in Tel Aviv and at the Oasis of Peace in Neve Shalom. She's academic director of the Yuri Stern Foundation, a holistic center for the support of cancer patients and their family members in Jerusalem. Her paper is entitled Creativity in the Interrelated Space. We welcome Smadar.
Hey. Lost in Translation, a film by Sofia Coppola, portrays, according to Netflix, two lost souls in Tokyo. These two Westerners, in a foreign reality, are experiencing feeling lost and empty due to an incapacity to translate the language of words, symbols, and cultural codes of their surroundings. It was fun for a while. There was no way of knowing, like dream in the night. Who can say where we are going? No care in the world. Maybe I'm learning why the sea on the tide has no way of turning. More than this, you know, there is nothing. Maybe you know the song by Roxy Music. That's what Bill Murray, who portrays the main character, sings. I'd like to suggest that there is more than nothing. There is something beyond words, symbolization, alphabetizing, and/or pictograms. There is a field of silence in the interpersonal relatedness, a field that is deep and varied as the ocean. Here I suggest the geography of the field, the various layers, poles, and forces that pull towards one direction or the other in the field between therapist and client. Creativity springs in the field of silence. Thus, metaphorically, I'm presenting the GPS, the navigation coordinates towards creativity in the field of interrelatedness. The field of silence, the shared space of interrelatedness, the thirdness, the encounter of communication based in beta elements and unbidden material that is evolving and unfolding out of the ground on being. In the beginning is the field in which all individuals are embedded. The field has attributes that cannot be delivered by words. It is a translucent dance. Each dance moves allow the other to descend further. One may say surrender into the relational field. It is a unique creation, a new and ceaselessly changing gestalt that expresses and represents the present shifting states of relatedness between patient and analyst. The impact of the dance is obvious. The change in the room is palpable. The presence of one person has made it possible for another to let emotional truth open. In the silence beyond words, the field may become a tactile presence. No words are said, and yet visceral communication is present. Here and now, it is a particular sacredness, a relentless ethic, a nakedness, everything stripped so that faith shines more brightly. Brightness is stripped too, especially brightness. there can be no consolation exterior to raw presence of already too many words, too many dashes. Raw presence of unknown, unknowable disappears too, superflows, misleading. The intensity is palpable and can be described more accurately in music or vibrations than the spoken language. It is simply impossible to translate the language of the living organism directly into the word language of consciousness, for the rationalistic thinking which has shaped man's mechanistic civilization is capable of smothering and extinguishing our insight into the fundamentally different language of the living organism. In the dance of at the space of thirdness, self and other are found, discovered, and or created. Without the interpersonal relationship, the self cannot be experienced, and the I-ness cannot be mirrored. Consequently, the self is always to be found, and always in interpersonal relations. The foundations of being are formed and or discovered in the field of silence via attunement of self and other, one right hemisphere to another. Secure attachment depends upon attunement not with the infant's cognition or behavior, but with the dynamic changes of the infant's affective and energetic states, the excitation, up and down regulations. In this mode of communication, the caregiver is attuned to the inner biological, physiological dynamics of the infant's body. Nonverbal communication conducted via one right hemisphere to another right hemisphere. The caregiver and infant learn together the embodied communication. This is how they create moment-to-moment synchronization and spontaneous rhythm of the bidirectional system of non-verbal attunement. This social, emotional environment with epigenetics that affects the development of the human individual occurs from the moment of conception. Interrelatedness is a non-verbal mode of communication, is an ongoing event in human's life, including the thirdness of the therapeutic encounter. Attunement, the channels that leads a dyad to a meeting of thirdness, is not alone in the field of silence. Eros is a driving force in the creation of the third. Descending into the field is a mutual process, rather than a hierarchical one of transference and countertransference based on unconscious processes. The space between two individuals in the psychotherapeutic dyad is filling into one another. It is a therapeutic lab of two-way nonverbal communication. A meeting of two, eye to eye, face to face. And when you are near, I will tear your eyes out and place them instead of mine. And when you will tear my eyes out and will place them instead of yours, then I will look at you with your eyes, and you will look at me with mine. Moreno's Eros has to do with authentic and real meeting. For Buber, an authentic meeting has to do with being seen and seeing the other's essence with openness and differentiation. This has to do with one capacity to relate authentically with herself or herself, and the ability to arrive at the interrelated space with a heart kinship. The encounter unfolds where there is love and faith, in the descent into the field of kinship and affinity, eye to eye, face to face, a meeting of two in the field of silence. The start point of descending into the field of silence is the state of perception of consensus, the cognitive state of consciousness, the cognitive stratum. Underneath cognition is the entry point to the nonverbal strata that consist of four main stratums: archetypal, hallucinatory, mindlessness, and the fifth stratum, the utter field of silence. In my mind's eye, other than being layers of the ocean's depth, I see this strata as an isosceles triangle iceberg. At the top of the iceberg, above the ocean waterline, is the cognitive stratum. The archetypal stratum is one that is at the edge of the water, somewhat exposed above the water. This archetypal stratum is seen by the conscious mind. At times, this stratum is underneath the waves at the edge of consciousness. Following the archetypal stratum, not too far from the edge of consciousness, is the hallucinatory stratum. At times, drinking great amount of alcohol, or maybe having a high fever, or even not sleeping for a while, will bring contact with that hallucinatory stratum. Further down into the ocean depth are the deepest strata, mindlessness, and then the deepest stratum in the field of silence, the utter field of silence, the stratum that is closest to the ground of being. The field of silence, fourth stratum, the cognitive layer, may be perceived also as the organizing entity. Its main characteristic in our context are the abilities to shift between roles of self-states. The second deepest layer, the archetypal stratum, encapsulates the psyche forces that were named by Freud, Jung, Hillman, and others as archetypes. The field of silence is conceptualized as unfolding from the ground of being into the world of phenomena. Here at the archetypal stratum, these forces present the quality of movement from the depth of being to the surface of cognition. Unlike self-states and roles of the cognitive layer, archetypes cannot be chosen by the individual, but are utilizing the individual psyche for interface with the world of phenomena. Thus, if at the cognitive stratum, one main purpose is greater awareness of self-parts in order to shift between them, with the archetypes the main objective is establishing relationships. Relationships with the archetypal forces enable greater freedom regarding their unfoldment. The main characteristic of the third strata, the hallucinatory layer, usually are being revealed under the influence of drugs, such as LSD, MDMA, or ayahuasca. The fourth strata, mindlessness, has the main quality of experiencing only vaguely the world of phenomena, including one's own body, space and time, shapes, forms, symbols, and sensations. Unlike the hallucinatory stratum, narrative lose their meaning. It is also a transition state into the deepest stratum, the fifth one, that is named the utter field of silence. At the utter field of silence, the deepest layer of the 5 layers model of that isosceles triangle iceberg, and the last deeper layer of the field of silence before the ground of being from which all arise. At the stratum of the utter field of silence, a most vague sense of I-ness exists. Primarily, there is an experience of totality. In general, about the isosceles triangle iceberg, the experience of loss of individuality and separateness intensifies the more one enters depth strata. Moreover, 2 poles exist at each of the sides of the isosceles triangle iceberg. At the horizontal axis, at one side, oneness, which may be named also pregnant silence, and on the other side, nothingness, which may be named psychic death. It's a gradation of thanatos and eros, along the parallel axis of all the 5 stratums. I believe that creativity springs from the ground of being, according to its manifestation in the varied state of consciousness, these 5 stratums that are strata of the field of silence. I suggest that descending and rising at the field of silence, moving between the levels with flexibility and by choice, like an instrument player that knows to play their music, is possible via the field of relatedness. There is no need for facilitating a drag, a specific form of breathing, or a mantra other than utilizing the forces of the field of interrelatedness. In the dyad, thirdness is created. It's a weave of a fabric made out of the translucent fibers going back and forth between therapist and client in the field. Not unlike the ancient myth about the ongoing creation of the world by the constant weaving of a giant spider web, if that web was to be created by 2 spiders. The creation is made because there is an attuned other. The more each of the participant is individuated and able to be authentic and open with oneself, the more the creation is flowing and allowing unbidden material to emerge from the ground of being. The more attunement is there to the nonverbal field, to the field of silence within oneself, to the other and to the mutual space, the greater is the intensity and the descending into depth layers of the field. There are many more things to detail about the map of the field of silence. However, I'll mention a few more only. First, choice and freedom to move between oneness and nothingness exist more at the top layers of that isosceles triangle iceberg. Greatest capacity for choice exists at the cognitive stratum. Secondly, the cognitive stratum is seen as a defense mechanism. The hallucinatory stratum may be entered according to choice, unlike the unfortunate event of entering a hallucination without choosing to, such as the episode of psychosis. And lastly, the mechanism of individuality, separateness, and the one of merger is not unlike the one in the stages of development, the merger of the infant and the caregiver, from which the toddler develops into the ongoing process of individuation. I'd like to end with a poem written by a dear friend, Michael Cronin. Be still and be watchful. Observe the arising and passing away of sensations, feelings, pleasures and fears, likes and dislikes. Be still and listen to the movement in which there is neither coming nor going. Thank you.